The morning sun painted the Afghan mountains in shades of gold and red as Lieutenant Sarah Chen stepped off the transport helicopter. The dust kicked up by the rotors made the SEAL team members cover their faces, but Sarah stood still, letting the gritty wind hit her directly. She had learned long ago that showing any sign of discomfort in front of these elite warriors would mark her as weak from the very first moment. The team leader, Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez, walked toward her with measured steps. His weathered face showed years of combat experience, and his dark eyes studied Sarah with the kind of intensity that made most people uncomfortable. Behind him, 5 other SEALs stood in a loose formation, their weapons ready, their faces showing various degrees of skepticism. "So you're our new intelligence officer," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying doubt like a heavy weight. "Command says you're supposed to help us track down Ahmad Nazir." He spat into the dust. "We've been hunting that terrorist for 8 months without any desk jockey's help." Sarah met his gaze without flinching. She had expected this reception. Female intelligence officers were rare enough in forward operating bases, but being assigned directly to a SEAL team was almost unheard of. At 28, she looked younger than her age, and her slight build made her appear even more out of place among these battle-hardened soldiers. "I'm here because Nazir has changed his pattern," Sarah replied calmly. "He's using new communication methods that require a different approach. My job is to get inside his head, not to tell you how to do yours." The other team members exchanged glances. Petty Officer Jake Morrison, a tall man with arms covered in tattoos, stepped forward. "Ma'am, with respect, we don't need anyone getting inside heads. We need boots on the ground and bullets in targets." Sarah nodded slowly. "I understand your concern, but Nazir isn't just any target. He's been one step ahead of every team sent after him because he thinks differently. Traditional hunting methods won't work." Rodriguez looked at his watch. "We've got a briefing in 20 minutes. You can tell us what makes you think you're different from all the other intelligence people who've failed to catch this guy." As they walked toward the command tent, Sarah noticed how the team moved together. Even in casual conversation, they maintained spacing that would allow for immediate defensive action. Their awareness of their surroundings never stopped, and their weapons were always within easy reach. These men had survived countless missions because they trusted each other completely. The base itself was a collection of temporary structures surrounded by concrete barriers and razor wire. Soldiers from various units moved between buildings, but Sarah noticed that other personnel gave the SEAL team a wide berth. Their reputation preceded them everywhere they went. Inside the command tent, maps covered every available surface. Red pins marked known enemy positions while blue pins showed friendly forces. Sarah immediately focused on the pattern of red pins, her trained mind beginning to process the information. "Nazir's last known position was here," Rodriguez said, pointing to a village about 30 miles northeast of their location. "But by the time we got there, he was gone. Same story for the last 6 attempts." Sarah studied the map carefully. "He's not just running randomly. Look at these positions." She traced a pattern with her finger. "He's moving in a spiral, always staying within range of these 3 mountain passes. He's not trying to escape the area. He's trying to control it." Morrison frowned. "Control it for what?" "That's what we need to find out," Sarah replied. "But first we need to understand how he's getting his information. Someone is telling him when we're coming." The team exchanged glances again, but this time their expressions showed interest rather than skepticism. Rodriguez leaned closer to the map. "You think he has someone on the inside?" "Maybe. Or maybe he's just better at reading the signs than we thought. Either way, we need to change our approach completely." Over the next hour, Sarah explained her analysis of Nazir's movement patterns, communication habits, and psychological profile. She had spent months studying everything about him, from his childhood in a remote village to his rise as a terrorist leader. She knew his favorite foods, his family relationships, and even his preferred sleeping arrangements. "The man we're hunting isn't just a terrorist," Sarah said. "He's a chess player who thinks 5 moves ahead. Every time we react to his last position, he's already planning his next 3 moves." Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he spoke. "So what do you suggest?" "We stop chasing him and start thinking like him. We figure out what he wants and get there first." The briefing ended with tentative agreement to try Sarah's approach, but she could see the doubt in their eyes. These men had succeeded through direct action and overwhelming force. The idea of psychological warfare was foreign to their training and experience. As they left the command tent, Morrison walked beside Sarah. "Ma'am, I've got to ask. What made command think you were the right person for this job? No offense, but you don't exactly fit the usual profile." Sarah smiled slightly. "None taken. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. I learned early that understanding people's motivations was the key to predicting their behavior. The military just gave me better tools to use that skill." "And the Falcon call sign?" asked another team member, Petty Officer Dave Chen. "That came from my first assignment in Iraq. I had a habit of spotting things from a distance that others missed. My commanding officer said I had eyes like a hunting falcon." Rodriguez overheard the conversation and turned back toward Sarah. "Well, Falcon, you'll get your chance to prove those eyes work in these mountains. We're moving out at dawn tomorrow." That evening, Sarah sat alone outside her quarters, studying satellite photos under a small lamp. The mountains around the base looked peaceful in the darkness, but she knew that dozens of enemy fighters were hidden among those peaks and valleys. She had convinced the team to try her approach, but now she had to deliver results. Failure wouldn't just mean the end of her career. It would mean that Ahmad Nazir would continue his reign of terror, and more innocent people would die. The stakes couldn't be higher, and tomorrow would begin the most important hunt of her life. The helicopter blades cut through the thin mountain air as Sarah pressed her face against the small window. Below them, the landscape looked like crumpled brown paper with deep valleys and sharp ridges creating shadows that could hide entire armies. The SEAL team sat in silence, each man lost in his own pre-mission thoughts. Sarah's stomach churned, but not from the turbulent flight. This was her first time going into enemy territory with a combat team, and despite all her training, she felt the weight of inexperience. The closest she had come to real combat was analyzing attack footage from the safety of intelligence centers. Chief Rodriguez's voice crackled through the headset. "LZ in 5 minutes. Remember, we're going in quiet. No contact unless absolutely necessary." The plan was simple in concept but dangerous in execution. Instead of raiding Nazir's last known location, they would position themselves at a village Sarah believed he would visit next. Her analysis suggested he was building a network of safe houses in a specific pattern, and this village fit perfectly into his strategy. But if she was wrong, they would be sitting in hostile territory with no target and limited extraction options. The helicopter touched down in a clearing 3 miles from their destination. The team moved out immediately, with Morrison and Chen taking point while Rodriguez stayed close to Sarah. The mountain air was thin and cold, making every breath feel insufficient. Sarah had trained for weeks to build up her endurance, but keeping pace with the SEALs pushed her to her limits. They moved through the terrain like ghosts, finding paths where she saw only obstacles. Every step was calculated to minimize noise and avoid detection. 2 hours into the hike, Rodriguez held up a closed fist, and the team froze instantly. Sarah heard nothing except her own heartbeat. But the SEALs had detected something her untrained ears missed. They waited in complete silence for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Finally, Rodriguez motioned them forward again. As they crested a small ridge, Sarah saw their destination below. The village consisted of maybe 20 buildings clustered around a central area. Smoke rose from several chimneys, indicating normal daily activity. "Looks peaceful," Morrison whispered into his radio. "Too peaceful," Rodriguez replied. "Where are the children?" "The animals?" Sarah studied the village through her binoculars. Rodriguez was right. Although smoke indicated people were present, there was no movement in the streets. No children playing, no women hanging laundry, no men working in the small gardens that surrounded most of the buildings. "Something's wrong," she whispered. "Either they know we're here, or something else has them scared." They established an observation post on the ridge with clear views of all approaches to the village. The waiting began. Sarah had never experienced anything like the patience these men showed. They could remain motionless for hours, watching every shadow and movement below. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah began to doubt her analysis. Maybe Nazir wasn't coming here. Maybe her psychological profile was completely wrong. The thought of leading these elite soldiers on a futile mission made her feel sick. Then Morrison's voice came through the radio, barely audible. "Movement. Southeast approach. 3 figures." Sarah focused her binoculars on the area Morrison indicated. 3 men in traditional Afghan clothing were walking toward the village, moving casually but alert. Even from a distance, she could see they carried weapons. Could be locals, Rodriguez said quietly. Sarah watched the men's body language carefully. No, look at how they move. They're scanning for threats, but they're comfortable with their surroundings. This is familiar territory for them. The 3 men entered the village and disappeared into one of the larger buildings. Within minutes, people began emerging from their homes. Children appeared in the streets and normal village activity resumed. They were hiding from someone, Sarah realized. But not from these 3 men. They were hiding from us. Rodriguez nodded grimly, which means someone told them we were coming. The implications were troubling. Either their mission had been compromised at the highest levels, or Nazir's intelligence network was even better than they had suspected. As evening approached, more men arrived at the village. Sarah counted at least 12 fighters, all armed with assault rifles and carrying equipment that suggested they planned to stay for a while. Still no sign of our primary target, Chen reported. Sarah studied the activity below through night vision equipment. The fighters were setting up a defensive perimeter around the village, but they were also bringing in supplies and communications equipment. This wasn't a temporary stop. He's not coming tonight, Sarah said finally. This is a staging area. They're preparing for something big. Rodriguez looked at her sharply. What kind of something? Sarah pointed to the communications equipment being unloaded. That's not standard guerrilla gear. They're planning to coordinate multiple units. This village is becoming a command center. The realization changed everything. Instead of hunting one terrorist leader, they had discovered a major enemy operation in development. But they were outnumbered at least 3 to 1 with no immediate backup available. We need to call this in, Morrison said. Negative, Rodriguez replied. By the time reinforcements arrive, they'll be gone. We've got a narrow window here. Sarah felt the weight of decision pressing down on them. Her analysis had led them to something bigger than expected. But now they faced choices that could determine whether the mission succeeded or failed catastrophically. There's another option, she said quietly. We don't have to attack them directly. The team turned to look at her. In the growing darkness, their faces were barely visible behind night vision goggles and camouflage paint. What are you thinking? Rodriguez asked. Sarah pulled out her tablet and showed them a map of the area. Look at the terrain. There's only one good road out of this valley, and it passes through a narrow canyon about 2 miles east of here. If we can get ahead of them, we can control when and where the engagement happens, Rodriguez finished. Turn their defensive position into a trap. Morrison nodded slowly. But we'd have to move tonight in the dark, through territory we haven't scouted. And if we're wrong about their departure time, we miss them completely, Chen added. Sarah looked at each member of the team. These men had trusted her analysis enough to follow her into enemy territory, but now she was asking them to risk everything on another judgment call. I know it's a gamble, she said, but if we wait, they'll disappear again. This might be our only chance to disrupt whatever they're planning. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, studying the map and weighing their options. Finally, he looked up at Sarah. Falcon, you've been right so far. But if we do this, there's no going back. Once we commit to that canyon, we're all in. Sarah felt the full responsibility of leadership for the first time in her career. The decision she made in the next few seconds would determine whether 6 people went home safely, or whether they became casualties of war. I believe they'll move at dawn, she said firmly. And I believe we can stop them. Rodriguez nodded once. Then we move out in 30 minutes. Everyone check your gear and prepare for a long night. The night march through the mountains tested every limit of Sarah's physical and mental endurance. The SEALs moved like shadows across terrain that seemed impossible to navigate in darkness, while Sarah struggled to keep up without making noise that would give away their position. Her legs burned from the constant climbing and descending, and the thin air made every breath feel inadequate, but she pushed forward, driven by the knowledge that 12 enemy fighters were somewhere behind them, possibly preparing for an attack that could kill innocent people. Rodriguez had planned their route carefully, using natural features to mask their movement. They followed dry creek beds when possible, stayed below ridge lines to avoid being silhouetted against the sky, and moved through areas where the rocky ground would leave minimal tracks. 3 hours into the march, Sarah stumbled on loose rocks and nearly fell. Morrison caught her arm, steadying her without making a sound. She nodded her thanks, knowing that any noise could bring enemy patrols down on them. The canyon Rodriguez had identified on the map was even more perfect than Sarah had hoped. The road wound through a narrow passage between two steep walls of rock, creating a natural choke point where a small force could control a much larger one. Textbook ambush site, Chen whispered as they studied the terrain. Good fields of fire, multiple escape routes, natural cover. But Sarah noticed something that troubled her. It's too perfect. If I can see the tactical advantage of this position, so can they. What if they don't take the road? Rodriguez considered this. There are other routes, but they're all longer and more difficult. If they're moving equipment and supplies, they'll need vehicles. They spent the remaining hours before dawn positioning themselves in the rocks above the road. Each SEAL found a position that provided both cover and clear sight lines to the kill zone below. Sarah positioned herself with Rodriguez, where she could observe the entire area and provide intelligence updates. As the first light of dawn appeared over the mountains, Sarah began to doubt her prediction again. The road remained empty, and no sounds of movement came from the direction of the village. Had she miscalculated Nazir's timeline? Were the enemy fighters still in the village, or had they left by a different route? Rodriguez remained calm, but Sarah could see the tension in his posture. Every minute they remained in position increased the risk of being discovered by enemy patrols or local civilians who might report their presence. Then Morrison's voice came through the radio, barely audible even through their earpieces. Vehicle movement. 2 trucks approaching from the west. Sarah felt her heart rate spike as she focused her binoculars on the road. 2 pickup trucks were indeed approaching, moving slowly and carefully. But something was wrong with the picture. Those aren't the men from the village, she whispered to Rodriguez. Look at how they're moving. They're being too careful. Rodriguez studied the approaching vehicles through his scope. You're right. This feels like a scouting party. The 2 trucks passed through the canyon without stopping, their occupants scanning the rocks above for any sign of ambush. Sarah counted 4 men in each vehicle, all armed and alert. Advance team, Rodriguez said quietly. The main group will be behind them. 20 minutes later, Sarah's prediction proved correct. A convoy of 4 larger trucks appeared on the road, moving at the same cautious pace. But these vehicles were loaded with equipment and personnel. Through her binoculars, Sarah could see at least 15 fighters spread across the 4 trucks. More importantly, she could see communications equipment, weapons caches, and what appeared to be explosives. This is bigger than we thought, she whispered to Rodriguez. That's enough equipment to outfit a major operation. Rodriguez was already calculating angles and distances. We can stop them here, but we need to be smart about it. If any of those trucks get through, they'll call for reinforcements. The plan they developed in whispered conversations was audacious and dangerous. They would let the convoy enter the canyon completely, then simultaneously disable the lead and rear vehicles to trap the others in the kill zone. Sarah's role was to coordinate the timing and provide real-time intelligence about enemy movements. It was her first time directing combat operations, and the responsibility felt overwhelming. As the convoy entered the canyon, Sarah watched through her binoculars and provided updates to the team. Lead vehicle is at the marker. Second vehicle entering the zone. Third vehicle. Before she could finish her count, everything went wrong. The lead truck suddenly accelerated and men began jumping from the back of all 4 vehicles. Someone had spotted the ambush and the convoy was scattering for cover. Execute. Execute! Rodriguez shouted into the radio. The canyon erupted in gunfire. The SEALs opened fire from their positions in the rocks, while the enemy fighters scrambled for cover behind their vehicles and rocks on the canyon floor. Sarah watched in fascination and horror as the battle unfolded below her. The SEALs' training was evident in their precise, controlled fire, while the enemy fighters responded with wild bursts that mostly hit rocks and empty air. But the enemy had advantages too. They outnumbered the SEAL team nearly 3-1, and they had multiple directions from which to return fire. Within minutes, Sarah could see enemy fighters moving to flank their positions. Movement on the south wall, she reported into her radio. 3 fighters heading for Chen's position. Rodriguez acknowledged her report and adjusted his fire to suppress the flanking movement. But Sarah could see more enemy fighters moving through the rocks on both sides of the canyon. We're going to be surrounded, she told Rodriguez during a brief lull in the firing. I know, he replied grimly. We need to start thinking about extraction. But extraction would mean abandoning the mission and allowing the enemy convoy to escape with whatever they were planning. Sarah knew that the intelligence value of the equipment in those trucks could prevent future attacks and save lives. Then she noticed something that changed everything. One of the enemy fighters was talking into a radio, but he wasn't coordinating the battle. His position and body language suggested he was calling for help from outside the canyon. "They're calling for reinforcements," Sarah told Rodriguez. "We've got maybe 20 minutes before this place is crawling with enemy fighters." Rodriguez nodded, his face grim behind his weapon sight. "Then we need to end this fast." What happened next would test every skill Sarah had learned and every assumption she had made about herself. The battle was about to enter its most dangerous phase, and her decisions would determine whether the team succeeded or whether they all died in this remote Afghan canyon. The sound of gunfire echoed off the canyon walls, creating a deafening roar that made communication difficult. But through it all, Sarah continued to watch and analyze, looking for the key insight that would turn the tide of battle. She was about to find it in the most unexpected place. The battle had been raging for 15 minutes when Sarah spotted him. Among the enemy fighters scrambling for cover in the canyon below, one man moved differently. While others fired wildly or sought protection behind rocks and vehicles, this man remained calm, directing others with hand signals and tactical awareness. "Rodriguez," Sarah whispered urgently into her radio. "Third truck from the front. Man in the dark vest behind the rear wheel. That's not just another fighter." Through her binoculars, Sarah studied the man's movements and behavior. He was older than the others, with gray streaks in his beard, and the way other fighters looked to him for direction confirmed her suspicion. "I think that's Nazir," she said. Rodriguez shifted his position to get a better view. "Are you certain?" Sarah compared what she saw with the photos she had memorized during months of intelligence analysis. The facial structure matched, and more importantly, the behavioral patterns fit her psychological profile perfectly. This man was calm under fire, analytical in his tactical thinking, and clearly the leader of the group. "I'm 90% certain," Sarah replied, "but he's in a position where we can't get a clear shot." The situation was becoming more desperate by the minute. Chen had taken a bullet in his shoulder and was bleeding badly, though he continued to fight. Morrison was running low on ammunition, and enemy fighters were working their way closer to the SEAL positions. Worse, Sarah could hear helicopters in the distance. The enemy reinforcements were arriving sooner than expected. "We need to move," Rodriguez said. "Extraction point Alpha in 5 minutes." But Sarah knew that if they left now, Nazir would escape again. All the intelligence, all the planning, all the risk would be for nothing, and whatever operation he was planning with that equipment would go forward. "Wait," Sarah said, studying the tactical situation. "There might be another way." She had noticed something about the canyon's geography that could work in their favor. A small ridge connected the two sides about 50 yards downstream from the convoy. If someone could get across that ridge, they could approach Nazir's position from an unexpected angle. "The ridge crossing," Sarah said, pointing it out to Rodriguez. "Someone could flank them from there." Rodriguez shook his head immediately. "Too dangerous. That's 200 yards of open ground under fire. Suicide mission." Sarah continued to study the terrain and the enemy positions. The more she looked, the more convinced she became that it could work. But it would require precise timing and someone willing to take enormous risks. "Not if we create a diversion," Sarah said. "Draw their attention away from that approach." "Negative," Rodriguez said firmly. "We're extracting." "That's an order." But as Sarah watched, Nazir began moving toward one of the undamaged trucks. He was preparing to escape, and once he disappeared into the mountains again, they might never find him. Without thinking about the consequences, Sarah made a decision that would define the rest of her military career. She grabbed her rifle and started moving toward the ridge crossing. "Falcon, stop!" Rodriguez shouted, but Sarah was already running. The next 60 seconds felt like hours as Sarah sprinted across terrain that offered minimal cover while bullets cracked through the air around her. Her training had never prepared her for the reality of being shot at, but adrenaline and determination kept her moving. She reached the ridge and threw herself behind a boulder, just as enemy fire concentrated on her position. Chips of rock showered down on her as bullets struck all around her hiding place. But her movement had accomplished exactly what she had hoped. The enemy fighters were now divided, with some shooting at her new position while others continued to engage the main SEAL team. The distraction created the opening Rodriguez needed. All call signs. Execute flanking maneuver, Rodriguez commanded. The SEALs moved with practiced precision, using Sarah's distraction to advance on the enemy positions. Morrison and Chen provided covering fire, while Rodriguez and the others moved to better tactical positions. From her position on the ridge, Sarah had a clear view of Nazir's location. He was still behind the truck, but now she could see him clearly. The problem was that she was not a trained sniper, and the shot was at least 100 yards through difficult terrain. She steadied her rifle against the rock and tried to control her breathing the way she had been taught. Through her scope, she could see Nazir clearly, but her hands were shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. Then she remembered something her instructor had told her during training. Don't think about the shot. Think about what happens if you don't take it. Sarah thought about the intelligence reports she had read. Nazir was responsible for dozens of attacks that had killed hundreds of innocent people. The equipment in those trucks would enable more attacks, more deaths. She took a deep breath, let half of it out, and squeezed the trigger. The shot was perfect. Nazir dropped immediately, and the effect on his fighters was instant. Without their leader's calm direction, they began to panic. Some tried to flee toward the canyon entrance, while others attempted to reach the remaining trucks. But the SEALs were ready for them. With Nazir down and the enemy in disarray, the tactical situation shifted completely. Rodriguez and his team moved systematically through the enemy positions, securing prisoners and equipment. The battle was over in less than 5 minutes after Sarah's shot. As the dust settled, Sarah remained on the ridge, hardly believing what had just happened. She had not only survived her first combat engagement, but had played a decisive role in capturing one of the most wanted terrorists in Afghanistan. Rodriguez's voice came through her radio, and for the first time since she had met him, he sounded impressed. Falcon, that was one hell of a shot. How did you know you could make it? Sarah climbed down from the ridge on shaking legs. I didn't, she replied honestly, but I knew what would happen if I didn't try. When she reached the convoy, she found Rodriguez examining the equipment they had captured. It was even more significant than she had realized. Communications gear, explosives, detailed maps of American bases, and plans for coordinated attacks across the region. This intelligence is going to save a lot of lives, Rodriguez told her. Your analysis was spot on, but Sarah barely heard him. She was looking at Nazir's body, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. She had accomplished her mission, but taking a human life even in combat was harder than she had expected. Chen approached her, his wounded arm in a makeshift sling. Ma'am, I owe you an apology. When you first showed up, I didn't think you belonged here. I was wrong. Morrison nodded in agreement. That flanking move was either crazy brave or just crazy, but it worked. As they waited for extraction helicopters to arrive, Sarah sat quietly and processed what had happened. In the space of a few hours, she had gone from being an untested intelligence officer to being a combat veteran who had eliminated a high-value target. But more importantly, she had earned the respect of some of the most elite soldiers in the world. The name Falcon would never again carry any doubt or skepticism. The extraction helicopters arrived as the sun reached its peak, their rotors cutting through the thin mountain air with mechanical precision. Sarah watched the medical team work on Chen's wounded shoulder, while other personnel secured the captured equipment and enemy prisoners. But the mission's success brought unexpected complications. Within hours of returning to base, Sarah found herself in a secure briefing room facing a colonel she had never met before. Colonel James Mitchell was a career intelligence officer with sharp eyes and the kind of presence that suggested he had seen every type of classified operation. Lieutenant Chen, Mitchell began, using her formal rank rather than her call sign, your actions today have created both opportunities and problems. Sarah sat at attention, unsure where this conversation was heading. The successful capture of Nazir and his equipment should have been cause for celebration, not interrogation. The intelligence you recovered has already prevented 2 planned attacks, Mitchell continued. The lives you saved today number in the hundreds. But your methods have raised questions at the highest levels. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Sir, if I acted outside proper protocols, Mitchell held up a hand to stop her. You acted outside all protocols, Lieutenant. What you did was either brilliant tactical thinking or dangerous recklessness. Command is still deciding which. The next hour involved detailed questioning about every decision Sarah had made during the mission. Mitchell wanted to understand not just what she had done but why she had made each choice. Her analysis of Nazir's psychological profile, her prediction of his movements, and especially her decision to break from the extraction plan to take the decisive shot. "Walk me through the moment you decided to leave your position," Mitchell said. "You had direct orders to extract." Sarah chose her words carefully. "Sir, I analyzed the tactical situation and determined that the mission objective was still achievable. The shot was within my capabilities, and the strategic value justified the risk." "Your capabilities?" Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "Lieutenant, your training record shows average marksmanship scores. What made you think you could make a shot that trained snipers would consider difficult?" This was the question Sarah had been dreading. How could she explain the clarity she had felt in that moment? The absolute certainty that she could make the shot when it mattered most. "Sir, I can't explain it completely. But I knew Nazir better than anyone else in that canyon. I had studied him for months, learned his habits, understood his psychology. When I saw him through my scope, it wasn't just a target. It was the culmination of everything I had learned about him." Mitchell made notes on his tablet. "The psychological profile you developed proved remarkably accurate. How did you develop such insights about a man you had never met?" Sarah thought about her childhood in small-town Montana, where understanding people's motivations was essential for social survival. She thought about her college psychology courses and her natural ability to read behavioral patterns. "I grew up in a place where everyone knew everyone else's business," she said. "I learned early that people's actions follow predictable patterns based on their fears, desires, and beliefs. Military intelligence training just gave me better tools to apply that understanding." Mitchell nodded slowly. "Your commanding officers have recommended you for the Silver Star for your actions today. They've also recommended you for immediate transfer to a specialized unit that could better utilize your unique skills." Sarah felt a mixture of pride and anxiety. Recognition for her actions was gratifying, but transfer from the SEAL team felt like losing a family she had just found. "Sir, I would prefer to remain with my current unit if possible." "That may not be possible, Lieutenant. What happened today has attracted attention from several different departments. Everyone wants to understand how an intelligence officer with minimal combat experience successfully eliminated a high-value target that had evaded capture for over a year." The briefing ended without clear resolution about Sarah's future assignment. As she left the secure room, she found Rodriguez waiting in the hallway. His expression was unreadable, but she could sense tension in his posture. "They're going to transfer you," he said without preamble. "Some special operations unit that handles psychological warfare and high-value targeting." Sarah felt disappointed but not surprised. "When?" "End of the week. But before you go, the team wants to do something." Rodriguez led her to the team's quarters where the other SEALs had gathered. Morrison stepped forward carrying a small wooden box. "Falcon," Morrison said formally. "We've been talking and we all agree. What you did today wasn't just good intelligence work. It was warrior stuff. Real operator-level performance under fire." He opened the box to reveal a military patch Sarah had never seen before. It showed a falcon in flight carrying a trident in its talons. Below the image were the words, "Death from above." "We had this made special," Chen said, his wounded arm still in a sling. "You're the first intelligence officer to earn it and probably the last. But you earned it the hard way." Rodriguez stepped forward. "Falcon, you've got a choice to make. You can take that transfer and become someone else's secret weapon, or you can stay with us and help hunt down every terrorist leader in this region." Sarah looked at the patch, understanding its significance. These men were offering her something that went beyond military rank or official recognition. They were offering her a place in their brotherhood. "The transfer orders aren't final yet," Rodriguez continued. "If you want to stay, I can make some calls. You've proven you belong here." Sarah thought about the opportunities that awaited her in a specialized unit. Better resources, more challenging missions, faster promotion opportunities. Everything a career-minded officer should want. But she also thought about the trust these men had shown her, and the feeling of absolute purpose she had experienced during the mission. Working with this team felt like the most important thing she had ever done. "I want to stay," she said firmly, "but I want to understand something first. Why were you all so skeptical when I first arrived?" Morrison grinned. "Ma'am, we've worked with a lot of intelligence people over the years. Most of them are smart, but they think too much and feel too little. They can tell you everything about an enemy except how to kill him." "You're different," Chen added. "You think like one of us. You see the mission, not just the analysis. Rodriguez nodded in agreement. Intelligence officers usually tell us what we can't do. You figured out what we could do and then helped us do it better. That evening, Sarah sat outside her quarters writing a letter to her parents. How could she explain what had happened to her in the space of a single day? How could she describe the transformation from desk analyst to combat operator? She decided to keep it simple. She told them she had been assigned to work with an elite team on important missions. She told them she was safe and doing work that mattered. She didn't tell them about the gunfight or the shot that had ended Ahmad Nazir's reign of terror. Some stories, she realized, were meant to be shared only with the people who had lived them. As she sealed the letter, Sarah realized that her life had changed permanently. The woman who had stepped off the helicopter yesterday morning was gone, replaced by someone harder, more confident, and more dangerous. Tomorrow would bring new missions, new challenges, and new opportunities to prove herself. But tonight, for the first time since arriving in Afghanistan, Sarah Chen felt like she was exactly where she belonged. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the same briefing room where Colonel Mitchell had questioned her after the Nazir operation. But this time, she was the one conducting the briefing, and the audience included some of the highest-ranking officers in the region. The walls were covered with photographs, maps, and intelligence reports documenting the most successful counterterrorism campaign in recent military history. 15 high-value targets eliminated, dozens of planned attacks prevented, and an entire terrorist network dismantled through psychological analysis and precision operations. The key to our success, Sarah explained to the assembled officers, has been understanding that modern terrorism is as much about psychology as it is about violence. These leaders think differently than traditional military commanders, and hunting them requires different methods. General Patricia Hayes, the regional commander, studied the results displayed on the wall. Lieutenant Chen, your team's success rate is unprecedented. How do you account for such dramatic improvement over previous operations? Sarah glanced at Rodriguez, who stood at the back of the room with the rest of their team. In 6 months, they had become something unique in military operations, a hybrid unit that combined SEAL tactics with psychological intelligence to create devastating effectiveness against terrorist leaders. Ma'am, we stopped thinking of intelligence and operations as separate functions, Sarah replied. Instead of analysts providing information to operators, we integrated both skills into every mission. The result is operations based on deep understanding of our target's thinking patterns. The briefing covered their most recent success, the capture of Kazim al-Rashid, a bomb maker who had been responsible for attacks across 3 countries. Sarah's psychological profile had predicted he would attempt to flee through a specific mountain pass during the new moon, and the team had been waiting for him. But as Sarah answered questions about methodology and results, she was thinking about what the success had cost. 6 months of constant operations had left its mark on everyone. Chen walked with a slight limp from a leg wound received in their 3rd mission. Morrison had nightmares that kept him awake most nights. Rodriguez had developed a nervous habit of checking his weapon even when relaxing, and Sarah herself had changed in ways that sometimes worried her. The woman who had struggled to keep up with the SEALs during her first mission was gone, replaced by someone who could outthink most enemies and outshoot many trained snipers. She had killed 11 people in 6 months, each death carefully planned and precisely executed. "What's next for your team?" General Hayes asked as the briefing concluded. "There's still work to do, ma'am," Sarah replied. "Our intelligence indicates at least 3 major terrorist leaders remain active in the region. We have preliminary psychological profiles developed and are planning operations to locate them." After the officers left, Sarah found herself alone with Rodriguez in the empty briefing room. He was studying the photographs of eliminated targets, his expression thoughtful. "You ever wonder if we're making a difference?" he asked. "Or if we're just creating space for new leaders to emerge?" It was a question Sarah had been asking herself more frequently. Every success brought new intelligence about other threats, other networks, other leaders, planning attacks against innocent people. The work seemed endless. "I think about the attacks we've prevented," Sarah said. "The people who went home to their families because we stopped someone who wanted to kill them." "That has to be enough." Rodriguez nodded, but she could see the doubt in his eyes. 6 months of constant operations was wearing on all of them, physically and emotionally. "There's something I need to tell you," Rodriguez said. "I've been offered a promotion and transfer. Training assignment back in the States." Sarah felt a stab of loss. Rodriguez had been more than a team leader. He had been a mentor who taught her how to survive in combat, and a friend who understood the burden of taking lives to save lives. "When?" she asked. "2 weeks. And Hayes wants you to take over the team." Sarah stared at him in surprise. Leading a SEAL team was a position traditionally reserved for career special operations officers with years of experience. She was still technically an intelligence officer, despite the combat training and operational experience she had gained. "I'm not qualified," Sarah said immediately. "You're the most qualified person in the region," Rodriguez replied. "You understand both the intelligence side and the operational side better than anyone. The team trusts you completely, and command recognizes your results." Over the next hour, Rodriguez explained what team leadership would involve. Not just planning and executing missions, but taking responsibility for the lives and welfare of 5 elite soldiers who had become her family. "The hardest part isn't the tactical decisions," Rodriguez said. "It's knowing that every choice you make could bring someone home safely or get them killed. That weight never gets easier to carry." Sarah thought about the decisions she had made over the past 6 months. Some had been brilliant, leading to successful missions with minimal casualties. Others had been mistakes that put people in danger or allowed targets to escape. "What if I make the wrong call?" she asked. "You will," Rodriguez said bluntly. "Everyone does. The question is whether you can learn from mistakes and keep making the hard choices when they need to be made." That evening, Sarah walked alone around the base perimeter, thinking about the path that had brought her from intelligence analyst to team leader in less than a year. The transformation seemed impossible when she considered it objectively, but each step had felt inevitable at the time. She thought about the letter she would write to her parents, explaining another promotion they wouldn't fully understand. She thought about the responsibility of leading men who had more combat experience than she did. Most of all, she thought about the enemies still out there, planning attacks that only her team seemed capable of preventing. When she returned to her quarters, Sarah found a package waiting on her desk. Inside was a new set of shoulder insignia showing her promotion to captain, along with a note from General Hayes. "Captain Chen." The note read, "Your country needs leaders who can adapt to new kinds of warfare and develop new ways of protecting innocent people. You have proven yourself capable of both. Don't let anyone tell you that you don't belong in this position. You earned it through performance under fire." Sarah picked up her phone and called Rodriguez. "I'll take the team," she said when he answered. "I knew you would," Rodriguez replied. "But there's one more thing. The team voted and they want to make it official. They want you to keep the Falcon call sign as team leader." Sarah felt a surge of pride and responsibility. The call sign that had started as recognition of her analytical abilities had evolved to represent something much more significant. To these men, Falcon meant someone who could see the battlefield clearly, strike with precision, and lead them safely through the most dangerous missions. "Tell them I'm honored," Sarah said, "and tell them we start planning the next operation tomorrow." As she hung up the phone, Sarah looked at herself in the small mirror above her desk. The woman looking back was confident, capable, and proven in combat. She bore little resemblance to the uncertain intelligence officer who had arrived in Afghanistan a year ago. The transformation was complete. Lieutenant Sarah Chen was gone, replaced by Captain Falcon Chen, leader of one of the most effective counterterrorism teams in modern military history. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new enemies, and new opportunities to prove that understanding the human mind could be the most powerful weapon in any arsenal. But tonight, Sarah felt ready for whatever came next. She had earned her place among warriors, and she intended to keep it.